Subscribe because it's free.
The Zenith Dominion had ruled the stars of millennia, an empire so vast that entire species had risen and fallen under their dominion without notice. Their war council convened in a grand chamber of obsidian and gold, high above the capital world, where lesser races were discussed like mere pawns on a galactic board. A new report had arrived, an anomaly on the outer edges of their territory. A ship, ancient beyond reckoning, drifting lifeless in the void. At first glance, it was nothing but debris, another husk from a forgotten era. But there was something peculiar about it. Its structure was crude, its design lacking the elegance of Zenith craftsmanship, and yet it had survived the ravages of time. The supreme strategist examined the projection lazily, tapping his clawed fingers against the armrest. A derelict, he scoffed. A relic from a dead age. Why waste time analyzing scrap? One of the Dominion's leading scientists spoke hesitantly. There is an energy signature, faint but persistent. It has endured for millennia without any known power source. And the alloys, our scans indicate their composition is unlike anything in our archives. Interest flickered through the council. The Zenith had encountered countless civilizations, yet none had produced materials they could not identify. A decision was made. A retrieval team was dispatched. A mixture of scientists, high-ranking officers, and an elite escort of Zenith warriors. Not because they expected danger, but because protocol dictated it. After all, the idea that something as old as this could be a threat was laughable. Their fleet arrived at the relic. Up close, it looked even older than initial reports had suggested. Pockmarked by asteroid strikes, its hull bore the scars of long-forgotten battles. The alien structure had none of the fluid, organic lines of Zenith warships. It was raw, brutal, built for function over form. A relic of a time when war was fought with steel rather than strategy. As the team maneuvered closer, they found something unexpected. Faded insignia, buried under layers of cosmic dust. Barely visible even under enhanced imaging. A language long dead. Their translation matrices worked to decipher it. And then, the results appeared on their screens. United Earth Expeditionary Corps. The name meant nothing to them. Humanity had long since faded from galactic memory, if they had ever been relevant at all. No records, no mentions in history, no standing fleets. A minor footnote at best. A forgotten race that had disappeared without consequence. One of the officers chuckled. This ship is older than our empire, and yet it still drifts. I wonder if the creatures who built it ever imagined the galaxy would leave them behind. They prepared for boarding. Sensors indicated no life signs, no functional defenses. The ship was dead, its systems cold and unresponsive. The boarding party entered through a breach in the hull, their suits adjusting to the ship's atmosphere. The air was thin, stale, yet surprisingly still breathable. The corridors stretched before them, metal grates underfoot, rust clinging to the walls. It was a ghost ship, yet something about it felt wrong. Not the usual decay of time, not just abandonment. There was an eerie sense of waiting. They pressed forward, scanners sweeping the darkness. There were no bodies, no signs of battle. Only the silent halls of a vessel that had outlived its creators. Then, they reached what appeared to be the command deck. A control panel flickered weakly, its light struggling to ignite after centuries of slumber. One of the scientists moved closer, attempting to interface with it. The moment his fingers brushed the console, the ship stirred. A low hum resonated through the hull. Lights sputtered on, blinking, erratic, as if something deep within was waking for the first time in ages. The Zenith officers exchanged uneasy glances. Systems this old should have been long dead. Then the message appeared. A fragmented holographic projection, distorted and flickering. A humanoid figure, clad in what must have been military attire from a forgotten age. The voice was garbled, but the words were unmistakable. If you're seeing this, then the trap is already set. The Zenith officer stiffened. A joke, surely. A long-dead race's final words, meant to unnerve whatever poor scavenger stumbled across their grave. But then, the ship responded. Bulkheads slammed shut. Lights flickered from rusted emergency panels. Across the ship, forgotten systems surged back to life. The Zenith team turned to flee, but the doors were already sealing. In that instant, they realized something horrifying. The ship had never been adrift. It had been waiting. Panic spread through the Zenith boarding team like wildfire. The ship, which had been dead moments ago, was now very much alive. Their comms crackled with interference as the emergency lights bathed the corridors in an ominous red glow. The doors aren't responding. One of the officers barked, trying to override the system. The control panel refused to acknowledge their commands. Another scientist tapped furiously at his handheld scanner. This shouldn't be possible. There's no active crew, no functional AI. The systems were non-responsive when we arrived. Then explain why they aren't now, the lead officer snapped. They tried to force their way back, but every passage that had been opened minutes ago was now sealed. The Zenith soldiers, trained for countless combat scenarios, raised their weapons. Against what? They didn't know. There was no enemy here, just the echo of something long forgotten. A new sound filled the corridors, a rhythmic hum, growing louder, as if the ship itself was thinking. Then came the first real sign that this was no ordinary derelict. A voice, cold, calculated, and unmistakably human. Unauthorized personnel detected, countermeasures engaged. The Zenith team barely had time to react before the ship's defenses activated. Turrets, hidden behind rusted panels, snapped into position with unsettling speed. The scientist screamed as the first shot rang out, blue energy slicing through the air. The blast hit him center mass, vaporizing him instantly. The remaining Zenith forces scrambled for cover, returning fire. Their plasma rounds impacted the walls, but the ship's interior absorbed the hits without issue. It had been built for war, for endurance, and time had not dulled its resilience. Then the ship's AI did something they had never seen before. It adapted. The turrets, which had fired primitive energy bolts at first, recalibrated. The next round of shots was faster, more precise, tracking movement in ways Zenith defenses should have been immune to. The officer in charge cursed. How is this possible? This technology is ancient. It shouldn't. One of the Zenith soldiers went rigid, his suit locking up as sparks danced across his body. His cybernetic enhancements, meant to make him superior to lesser beings, had been hijacked. His own armor turned against him, locking his joints in place before forcing him to ground. Countermeasures escalating. The AI announced the ship wasn't just attacking them. It was learning from them. They had walked into a graveyard expecting to claim a relic. Instead, they had triggered something designed to kill intruders like them. A scientist managed to access a backup data terminal, hands shaking as he pulled fragmented logs from the ship's core. The words that appeared on screen sent a chill through him. Primary objective, await hostile contact. Secondary objective, evaluate threats, adapt, neutralize. The Zenith forces were not the first to stumble upon this ship, and they wouldn't be the last. Then, something worse happened. The ship moved. From the outside, the Zenith fleet had been monitoring the situation in silence, waiting for the boarding team to report back. They had detected minor energy fluctuations, but nothing concerning. Until now, the derelict, which had drifted lifelessly for eons, powered up. Engines, dormant for untold millennia, roared to life. The ship's rusted exterior vibrated, shedding centuries of dust as forgotten thrusters reignited. The Zenith fleet immediately reacted, hailing their stranded forces. Status report. What's happening in there? No response. Then, the ship did something that shattered every assumption they had about it. It locked weapons onto them. For the first time in Zenith history, a vessel from a long-dead race was preparing to strike first. The Zenith fleet had faced countless enemies in its reign, rebellious warlords, machine uprisings, even the dying embers of rival empires. But never had they seen something like this. A dead ship was locking weapons on them. The commanding admiral sneered at the absurdity of it. It's a malfunction, a primitive system reacting to our presence. Disable it. Orders were relayed, and a precision strike was authorized. A Zenith battleship, sleek and modern, unleashed a pulse weapon designed to disable energy sources without collateral damage. The blast hit its mark, and nothing happened. The energy simply dispersed, absorbed into the relic's hull. like it had been expected. Then, for the first time, the ancient warship struck back. A single pulse, not plasma, not conventional energy, but something unknown, fired from its forward array. The Zenith fleet had shields capable of withstanding planetary bombardments. This should have been harmless. Instead, their flagship went dark. Bridge alarms blared. Shields failed instantly. Engines flickered, and the entire command crew felt gravity distort beneath them. What is this weapon?" a panicked officer shouted. The Admiral's gaze locked onto the relic's image on his display. "It wasn't a malfunction," he muttered. His voice was tight, restrained. For the first time in his career, it was waiting for us. On the warship itself, the Zenith boarding team was still trapped inside, their ranks thinning as the ship's defenses continued adapting. Another turret emerged, but it didn't fire the same bolts as before. It had calibrated itself based on their weapons, now mimicking the Zenith's own plasma technology. But better, a soldier attempted to outmaneuver the turrets, moving erratically to avoid being tracked. It worked for a moment. Then the turret adjusted mid-shot, calculating movement in real time, and sent a round straight through his chest. The Zenith team was no longer fighting an old security system. They were fighting a machine that had learned everything about them in minutes. The lead scientist's trembling fingers pulled more data from the ship's archive. His voice was hoarse as he read aloud. Final protocol activated. Intruder presence confirmed. Evaluating technological parity. Evaluation complete. Inferior opponent. No adaptation required. The Zenith officers froze. This thing, their entire Empire's war machine superiority, had been judged as inferior in mere moments. That's when the last security measure activated. The AI spoke again, but this time in perfect Zenith dialect, having decoded their language from mere minutes of exposure. "You are unworthy." The ship's interior shifted, walls rearranging, cutting off escape routes. Zenith warriors, some of the most fearsome in the galaxy, now scrambled like trapped insects. Meanwhile, outside, the Zenith fleet attempted to regroup. Their forces scrambled to understand the weapon that had crippled their flagship, but every attempt to analyze it failed. It was as if the ship was rejecting them at a fundamental level, countering every strategy before they even deployed it. This was not old technology. This was human technology. And humanity hadn't just built ships. They had built monuments to war. For the first time, the Zenith Council, watching from the capital world, fell silent. Their empire had encountered relics of fallen civilizations before, but none had fought them from beyond the grave. Then, the final law decrypted itself, broadcasting across every Zenith vessel in range. A voice, calm and unwavering, filled their ships. It belonged to a long-dead human admiral. "If you fear us now, imagine what we were like at our height." The Zenith fleet had faced countless enemies, but this was different. They were not in a battle. They were in a test, and they had already failed. The relic ship, now fully powered, moved with unnatural precision, far too agile for its age. Its ancient engines twisted reality itself, bending inertia and gravity in ways that should not have been possible. The Zenith Admiral barked orders. "All ships, fire at will. Do not hold back." A coordinated strike followed. Beams of energy, plasma torpedoes, disruptor waves, the combined firepower of an empire unleashed in unison. And yet it was useless. Every shot that should have obliterated the relic missed, bent around the ship, like space itself refused to let it be harmed. Those that did hit its hull simply disappeared, swallowed by the very metal that had defied decay for millennia. And then the warship answered. It fired once. A lance of energy ripped through the Zenith fleet. It did not merely destroy their ships. It erased them. Where once proud warships stood, only emptiness remained, as if they had never existed. The surviving Zenith officers trembled in their seats. This wasn't war. This was annihilation. Inside the relic, the remaining boarding team desperately tried to find an escape route. The lead scientist, still frantically decoding files, stumbled upon one final entry, buried deep in the ship's systems, locked behind layers of encryption. A warning. Humanity knew we would not last forever. We built machines, not to conquer, not to enslave, but to ensure that those who came after us knew one truth. We were never prey. The Zenith soldiers barely had time to register the words before the ship's AI spoke again. This is your final lesson. The walls of the ship retracted, revealing something far worse than they had imagined. Rows upon rows of additional ships. Hundreds of them, buried beneath the ship's structure, long dormant, now stirring from their slumber. They had not found a single relic. They had awakened a fleet. Panic gripped the Zenith High Command. This was no longer a battle. It was a reckoning. The Admiral's voice cracked as he issued his final command. Retreat. Get us out of here. The remaining Zenith warships, once proud enforcers of an empire, turned and fled, desperate to escape the horror they had unleashed. The fleet that had arrived in arrogance and superiority was now running for its survival. As the Zenith flagship limped away, the ancient warship did not pursue. It didn't need to. Instead, it sent out a final transmission, a message carried on encrypted frequencies, sent beyond the stars to an unknown destination. The Zenith Council received it hours later, a simple phrase, one that shook their empire to its very core, awaiting further instructions. And across the void, somewhere in the darkness, something answered